With the rapid rise of meme stocks and the many people who have turned their $100 portfolios into something like many hundreds of thousands of dollars in the most extreme cases with leveraged options and crazy different plays like that, it can be super tempting to put a lot of money towards these highly speculative bets in an effort to try and catapult your wealth that way. And then all of a sudden you won't have to worry about trying to catapult your wealth anymore because you will have had a huge win. After all, if you had the opportunity to cut in line in wealth building, why wouldn't you do it? You'd have all this money there. I'm not talking about fraud or anything like that. But if you could do it ethically by doing something like a super leveraged option play or some crazy sort of stock trade, then why wouldn't you do it if you knew you could turn your portfolio into something humongous? And while it's certainly your prerogative to do whatever you want with your money, whether that be making these crazy trades or trying to produce massive amounts of money in a very short period of time using very high risk strategies, I mean, go ahead. You can do that all you want. But I do think it's important to talk about this very human trend of being impatient and wanting to try and create massive wealth very quickly with comparatively little effort compared to something like a long-term wealth building strategy. After all, for the large number of successes you might see on things like Wall Street bets, there are countless numbers of failures on there as well. Yet even when we understand the risk of total loss in many cases with something like a short-term options trading strategy, for example, where your options contract is going to expire in a matter of days or weeks or even hours in some extreme cases, that still doesn't stop so many people because we as humans just have this tendency to think that we have some sort of advantage that we can exploit, or we know something or somehow quicker than everyone else, even when we might not actually be that way. This isn't to say that you can't have some sort of advantage that allows you to produce a lot of income or wealth in some way very quickly compared to other people. But the likelihood of that being the case, where you could produce an enormous amount of money reliably very quickly, is very slim, especially if you've only been in the market for, say, 3 months and you've had a few great trades in a row, and now you think you are all world and can't be stopped. But one of the biggest problems with an overconfidence in some ability that may or may not exist is people often will go down the rabbit hole of leveraging it up in a huge way or a very dangerous way, or pulling money that they don't actually have to make these lucrative bets, or seemingly potentially lucrative bets that often could wind up being a total zero when we get down to it. Because while it might seem like that trade is isolated in that if you lose all your money there, that's it, if it's leveraged, which it often is in these crazy bet cases, at least if you're trying to move the needle in your financial life, if you're just starting out and you say only have a few $1,000s to your name that you can invest anyways, you're probably going to want to leverage it up so it really makes a big difference in your life. But remember, that goes both ways. If it doesn't go well, then you're making a very negative difference on your life. And that affects everything else beyond that trade. If you have a bunch of debt, it's not going to disappear when the trade goes south or whatever it is you're trying to do in the short term. If you lose all your asset value there, you still have the debt value to take care of. And if you don't have a lot of money coming in through your job or through other investments, which you probably don't if you're making these crazy bets with a large percentage of your portfolio, well, then you're in big trouble. Now, all of a sudden, your credit might get ruined. You might get evicted if you're paying rent. You might lose your home if you're paying a mortgage, if you're not bringing enough income in to take care of this. Or if something expensive and unexpected happens, for example, right behind me, my basement is ripped up because we had a bunch of water damage thanks to a crazy storm and a broken sewer pipe. So all the sump pump water is being pumped into one spot, and it came in through this window behind me and totally destroyed my basement. That could happen. And if you're off a terrible trade where you over leveraged yourself and threw all the margin you could at it, you pulled from your credit cards, you took out a HELOC on your home to go into this crazy trade that you thought was going to be amazing. And sure, if it hit, then you would have been changing your life for much, much better. But in this case, it didn't hit. And now what are you going to do? Now everything is going to be much, much worse. It's not as though you're just staying at the same level when you overleverage yourself and you're trying to get rich in 6 months. You have to be prepared for things outside of the portfolio to happen too. And if you put too much towards your reckless side of your portfolio, or if the portfolio is entirely reckless, just the whole portfolio, then you are putting yourself in a very, very vulnerable position, and one that probably most people would steer clear from if they really understood what they were getting themselves into. But let's remove leverage from the situation. So you're not even bringing debt to the table. You're just going to bet 80% of your portfolio on short-term call options on some stock that you like, and you're really betting on those earnings to be great, and you really think you can turn this money into something much greater in a matter of weeks. You've saved up a full year and a half of your salary, and you have a little bit of extra reserves here and there, so it's not as though if you lost this money, you'd be starving or something like that. You still have your W-2 job, you're bringing in money that way, so you're paying for your expenses outside the portfolio. That's a good step in the right direction, but now in this case, you bet a massive portion of your portfolio that was a couple years of saving up potentially, but then the company doesn't post the best earnings, people don't like it, they sell off the stock, your call options are way out of the money since you bought them out of the money in the first place, of course, because that's where you can get the best outsized returns if things hit, but in this case, they did not. So now you're out a massive portion of that money, and potentially years of your working life are basically vaporized because you had a total loss of capital. That's the kind of risk that you really have to respect when you're investing in anything. What is the chance that this investment goes south in a big way and I can't recover my capital? I don't have time to make it up. In this case, the options expire on a timeline, so you don't have time to just wait it out or anything like that. What are the chances of total loss of capital happening to this investment? Because now, in your effort to get rich in 6 months, you've set yourself back potentially a few years as you try to work back up to earn that money back and then maybe try it again and do some other reckless bet. And then there's no guarantee that that bet pays off. Of course, if it does, then great. But then the chances are, if you're really getting into all these reckless bets, you're going to keep doing them over and over with very outsized positions, ones that are putting your portfolio at great risk at pretty much any given time. And eventually one is not going to go well. And then you're going to be back to square one, even if the portfolio compounds itself in a pretty big way in the short term. But because you keep making these giant bets, these giant reckless bets, there's inevitably going to be one that doesn't hit. And this isn't even to get started on the mental energy that needs to be expended towards these sorts of ventures. You're putting all of this money on the line at any given time for this short-term trade. You're going to be stressing about that for quite some time as well. You're not going to be able to focus as well on other things that might be able to make you more money in the future. If you're trying to build a skill or build a career or build a business, you're instead going to be focusing on this short-term trade, paying attention to the stock price or the value of whatever it is. And you're just going to be focusing all of your energy towards something that you probably can't control anyways. And it's not a very productive use of your time. And that's whether or not your investment actually pans out. That's just in the meantime waiting for it to pan out. Even if an investment might seem passive, if you're stressing about it all the time, is it really a passive investment anymore? Well, let's compare this to a more measured, longer-term strategy, and really short-term in the grand scheme of things if we're talking about the game of life. Let's say you have a 10-year financial independence strategy. That's probably going to be a lot more likely to be achievable than a 1-year or 6-month financial independence strategy where you put everything on the line, you throw all your student loans that you get from the government to pay for your living expenses, you then instead roll it into some crazy investment and hope for the best, cross your fingers, and maybe hope that the government will waive your student loans in the event that this doesn't work. That sounds a whole lot more unreliable than a strategy where you just save a large portion of your income for maybe a decade, maybe even a little bit less if you got a higher income, and you just plow it towards relatively safe investments. I'm not talking about crazy, super conservative investments, but maybe a little bit of a diversified portfolio, got some real estate, got some stocks, got a business maybe that you're working on and taking time to build, not trying to get rich quick. And that's on the business side as well. If you're trying to build your own business, you wouldn't want to build one with a super shoddy foundation and not a great product or not some valuable service. And you're just trying to get rich quick on the business side too. You don't want to do that either because that's not sustainable too. It is very, very difficult, unless you're some absolute savant, to turn your small portfolio into a very large, sustainable one in a matter of months. It is something that probably will take you a pretty substantial amount of time. And I'm not even talking about many decades here. I'm comparing 6 months to maybe 6 or 7 years. Now, that still is a long time, don't get me wrong. 7 years is a substantial amount of time for just about anyone, but 7 years versus maybe 50 or 60 in a career that you might not enjoy, and you're still putting yourself in a great financial position. And even if you do enjoy the career, you can still stick with it, only now you're in a just simply better financial position. That's something I think pretty much anyone would take. But if you're constantly churning through short-term bets without proper risk management, I'm not talking about the proper risk management that you might hear about on TikTok, but real proper risk management, some decent amount of diversity, that being a little bit of diversification, not having too much leverage compared to the amount of income that the assets are throwing off, that sort of risk mitigation, that's what we're talking about, that risk management. That's going to be a lot more sustainable than trying to flip heads 100 times in a row. Long story short, don't try to get rich in 6 months. It's probably going to take a lot more time than that. And if it doesn't, well, tip of the cap to you. You did really well, but chances are you probably had the predisposition to keep doing these sorts of bets, and inevitably you're probably going to run into a bad one and you're back to square one. And then you'll be wishing that you just would have done something a little bit more conservative and still pretty aggressive relative to the general population, putting a lot of money towards investments. But if you just do that, you'll probably end up in a much better position anyways, many years down the line. Anyways, that's all I've got for today. So if you like this video, please like it, since that would help the channel out a lot. And if you like this sort of content about investing and personal finance, then be sure to subscribe, since I put out new videos every single week. And check out the free stuff and the affiliate links in the description below to add to your blossoming portfolio. But until next time, take care.